You may feel alone in this moment, like you're walking through life with no one by your side, but let me tell you this. Loneliness is not the end of your story. It's a chapter, a season, a trial, but it's never the final word. A man with no friends is not a man without value. In fact, it is in these moments of solitude that you find the strength that is forged in fire, a strength that comes not from the company of others, but from the unwavering presence of the one who never leaves. The world will try to convince you that friendship is defined by numbers, by popularity, by the fleeting attention of others. But God's definition of friendship is not shaped by these things. Jesus himself was no stranger to loneliness. He walked the earth, often misunderstood, surrounded by people, yet at times he found himself in solitude, even in the Garden of Gethsemane, when his disciples fell asleep and the weight of the world was on his shoulders. But in that moment when all seemed lost, he turned to his Father, and there he found his strength. This is the truth you need to hear today. You are never truly alone. Your worth is not determined by the presence of others, but by the unshakable truth that God is always with you. Your friendship with him is the greatest one you can ever have, and he is constantly shaping and refining you through every trial. It is in the quiet moments, in the loneliness, that you become more aware of his presence, his love, and his call for you to rise above the challenges. It's easy to feel abandoned, but let this truth sink deep into your heart. You are never abandoned by God. He is with you, and he has great plans for your life. He is working in the silence, preparing you for greater things. The strength, courage, and resilience you seek aren't found in the approval of others, but in the intimate relationship you cultivate with your Creator. Let go of the lie that being alone means being weak or insignificant. Instead, embrace the fact that it is in your solitude that God works his mightiest miracles. When you walk with him, even in the darkest times, you are not walking in defeat. You are walking in the power of his promise that he will never leave you nor forsake you. This is your season of transformation, your moment to grow, and your opportunity to lean into his voice like never before. So take heart today. Whether you stand alone or feel the weight of loneliness, know this: you are never truly alone. God is with you, and he will see you through every trial, every season, and he will raise you up in his perfect timing. In your solitude, find strength. In your silence, hear his voice. And know that your journey with God is far more powerful than any friendship this world can offer. Stand tall, for you are his child, and he is with you always. Loneliness can feel like an overwhelming weight, a silent burden that presses heavily on your soul, making it hard to breathe, and even harder to see beyond the darkness. In a world that often equates success and happiness with social circles and external validation, being without friends can make you feel invisible, like you're less than, or that something is wrong with you. It's a place where doubt can grow and insecurities can take root. But it is important to understand this truth. Loneliness is not the end of your story. As humans, we are naturally wired for connection. We long to be understood, to belong, to share our lives with others. Friendships are a beautiful gift, a testament to the joy of mutual understanding, trust, and shared experiences. However, there are seasons in life when friendships may feel distant, when we find ourselves walking alone. It's during these times that we must remember that being alone does not mean being abandoned, and it doesn't define our worth. It's not the absence of people that defines us. It's our relationship with God and his presence that fills the space where others may be missing. Throughout history, some of the greatest men and women of faith experienced deep seasons of loneliness. Take, for instance, the prophet Elijah. Elijah was a powerful servant of God, a man who stood boldly against the prophets of Baal, demonstrating God's power to an entire nation. But after his victory on Mount Carmel, he found himself in a place of fear, isolation, and discouragement. He fled from Jezebel and hid in a cave, feeling completely alone, as though no one was left to stand for God. In 1 Kings 19:10, Elijah says, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. Elijah's feelings of loneliness were not unique. They reflect what many of us experience when we are isolated, when the weight of the world feels too heavy to bear alone. Yet God's response to Elijah was not condemnation, but comfort. He spoke to Elijah not in the grand show of fire, earthquake, or wind, but in a whisper. God reminded Elijah that he was not, in fact, alone, and that there were still 7,000 in Israel who had not bowed to Baal, 1 Kings 19:18. Even in his loneliness, God was present. Elijah's circumstances did not change immediately, but God's presence in the midst of his isolation gave him strength, purpose, and clarity. The key takeaway here is that loneliness doesn't equate to abandonment. Even when we feel alone, God's presence is with us, working in us, shaping us, and equipping us for the journey ahead. When we're in these seasons of solitude, it's easy to believe the lie that our loneliness defines us. It's easy to let the absence of friends, the lack of human connection, cloud our vision of who we are and who we are becoming. However, it's important to understand that your worth is never measured by the number of people in your life or the attention you receive from others. Your value comes from your relationship with God, who created you in his image and loves you unconditionally. The truth is, loneliness often forces us to face ourselves in ways that comfort and companionship never could. In the silence, we are forced to confront our inner thoughts, our fears, our doubts, and our insecurities. It's in this space that God begins to shape us, refining us like gold in the fire. God does his deepest work in us when we're in the quiet, in the spaces where we are alone with our thoughts and with him. This is when we learn to rely not on the approval of others, but on his voice, his truth, and his presence. This is when we become more deeply rooted in our faith. Jesus himself is no stranger to loneliness. He walked this earth as fully God and fully man, and he experienced the deepest form of loneliness that anyone could ever know. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he asked his disciples to stay awake and pray with him as he faced the impending agony of the cross. Yet even in that moment, his friends fell asleep. In his hour of greatest need, Jesus was left alone. In Matthew 26:40-41, Jesus speaks to his disciples, saying, "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" Despite the deep anguish he faced, he remained obedient to his Father's will. He was in complete solitude, preparing for the mission that would change the world. Jesus understood the pain of being alone, yet he showed us that even in those moments, we can draw near to God. His relationship with the Father was not dependent on the presence of others, but on the intimate connection he had with God. Jesus' experience teaches us that even in loneliness, we can find the strength to keep going. In those moments, we must turn our hearts to God, pour out our souls, and trust that he will sustain us. Another biblical figure who offers us wisdom in loneliness is the Apostle Paul. Paul faced unimaginable trials, from imprisonment to shipwrecks, from beatings to betrayal. Yet, in the midst of it all, he found peace, not in the presence of friends, but in the faithfulness of God. In 2 Timothy 4:16-17, Paul writes, "At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength." Paul's experience highlights a powerful truth. Even when people fail us, when we feel abandoned by those we thought would stand by us, God will never leave us. He is always present, always providing the strength we need to face our battles. Loneliness also has the potential to teach us how to lean on God in ways we may not have done before. When surrounded by others, it's easy to rely on the support and encouragement of friends, but in times of solitude, we must learn to turn our hearts fully to God. This shift is not easy, but it's through this deepening reliance on God that we grow stronger in our faith. We become more attuned to his voice, more sensitive to his guidance, and more aware of his presence. We must embrace the reality that loneliness is not a reflection of our worth or value. It is a season, a time that God can use to mold and refine us. It's during these times that God invites us to grow in intimacy with him, to learn to rely on him, and to experience his love in ways that we may never have known in the company of others. Instead of seeing loneliness as a curse, let us see it as a blessing. a season of deepening faith, a time to draw closer to the one who will never leave us or forsake us. So if you find yourself in a season of loneliness today, remember that you are never truly alone. God is with you, and He is working in you, preparing you for the next chapter of your life. Your worth is not defined by your relationships with others, but by your relationship with God. He has a plan for you, and this season is just a part of His greater purpose. Embrace the quiet trust in His timing and know that He is doing something beautiful in your life even when you can't see it yet. Loneliness often carries with it a deep sense of despair, an overwhelming feeling that you are not seen, not valued, and not understood. But there's a profound truth that we need to hold on to. Loneliness is not an indicator of a lack of worth. It's simply a season, a moment in time that does not define us. The world might tell you that being surrounded by people is the measure of success or fulfillment, but that is not the truth. You are not defined by the presence of others in your life. Your worth, your identity, your purpose, and your value are rooted in something far greater than any external factor. They are rooted in your relationship with God. Too often, the absence of friends or the isolation we feel in difficult times can lead to the mistaken belief that we are insignificant, that we have failed somehow. This belief is a lie, and we must recognize it for what it is. A deception designed to keep us from understanding the true power of our relationship with God. In those moments of loneliness, when the world seems to be moving forward without us, we need to remember that our worth is not determined by the opinions or actions of others, but by the eternal truth that we are loved by the Creator of the universe. There are countless examples in the Bible of individuals who found themselves alone, yet through their solitude, they discovered a deeper intimacy with God and a greater understanding of their purpose. These figures remind us that loneliness does not mean abandonment, and solitude does not equal defeat. On the contrary, loneliness often becomes the fertile ground in which God does His most significant work in us. It is in these moments that we are stripped of distractions, and we can focus fully on our relationship with Him. It is during these times that God shapes us, refines us, and prepares us for what is yet to come. Take, for instance, the story of Joseph. Joseph's life was marked by profound loneliness, betrayal, and hardship. From the time he was sold into slavery by his own brothers, Joseph found himself far from his family, from any semblance of home. He was isolated in a foreign land, far removed from any support system. But it was precisely in this loneliness that God began to do something extraordinary. In the pit of his despair, Joseph did not lose his faith. In fact, the Bible makes it clear that the Lord was with Joseph, Genesis 39:2. Even though he was alone, even though the people who should have supported him had turned against him, Joseph was never truly abandoned. God was with him every step of the way, guiding him through the trials, elevating him to positions of influence, and eventually using him to save nations. Joseph's story is a powerful reminder that loneliness does not mean that God has abandoned you. In fact, it's in these moments that God is often doing His most important work in us. Joseph's time in prison and his years of separation from his family were not wasted. They were the very experiences that shaped him into the man God intended him to be, a man of great wisdom, resilience, and faith. It was through his time of loneliness that Joseph learned to rely fully on God and trust in His plan. It was in the midst of isolation that Joseph's character was forged, and he emerged stronger and more prepared for the purpose God had in store for him. Consider also the Apostle Paul, whose life was marked by isolation and imprisonment. Paul's ministry was one of great influence and profound impact, but it was also a ministry that led him into many seasons of loneliness. Imprisoned on multiple occasions, often abandoned by friends and fellow believers, Paul knew what it was like to feel alone. Yet, despite his circumstances, Paul never allowed his isolation to define him. Instead, he leaned into God's presence, finding strength in His companionship. In 2 Timothy 4:16-17, Paul writes, "At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against him." But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. In this moment of abandonment, Paul was reminded that God was with him. God was his constant companion, the one who never left his side. Paul's letters, many of which were written while he was in prison, reflect the depth of his relationship with God. They are filled with words of encouragement, faith, reminding us that even in the darkest of circumstances, God is still present, still working, and still loving us. Paul's story shows us that loneliness is not a sign of defeat or abandonment, but a reminder that we can draw near to God in a way that we may not be able to when we are surrounded by people. It is in these times that our dependence on God grows stronger, and we are transformed into the people He has called us to be. Another example is King David, a man after God's own heart, who spent many years fleeing from Saul, hiding in caves and enduring periods of deep isolation. Yet it was in these very moments of loneliness that David wrote some of his most powerful psalms, expressing his deep dependence on God and his trust in his unwavering love. In Psalm 25, 16, 17, David cries out, "Turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. Relieve the troubles of my heart and free me from my anguish." Despite his loneliness, David's heart remained fixed on God. He knew that his ultimate source of comfort and strength was not in human companionship, but in the presence of his heavenly Father. David's Psalms reflect the intimate relationship he had with God during his seasons of loneliness. They show us that loneliness can be a time of deep spiritual growth. It's a time when we can draw closer to God, pour out our hearts to Him, and allow His peace to fill the spaces of our lives that feel empty. David's story reminds us that even when we are alone, we are not truly alone. God is always near, and His presence is a source of comfort, strength, and peace. What we see in these stories is a common thread. Loneliness does not mean that we are abandoned by God. Rather, it is a season where God draws us closer to Him, shapes our character, and prepares us for the future He has planned for us. It is in the silence, in the solitude, that we learn to lean more heavily on God, to trust in His timing, and to grow in our relationship with Him. Loneliness is not the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where we discover that God is enough. He is with us in our loneliness, and He will never leave us. In those moments when we feel most alone, when we wonder if anyone sees us or cares for us, we can rest in the truth that we are never forgotten. God's love is constant and unchanging. It is in the midst of loneliness that we can truly come to understand the depth of that love, and it is in those moments that our faith grows stronger. The absence of human companionship is not a reflection of our worth or significance. It is simply an invitation to draw closer to the one who will never leave us. In our solitude, we can find strength, peace, and the unwavering presence of a God who loves us deeply and intimately. When we find ourselves in moments of loneliness, it's easy to get caught up in the feeling of emptiness and despair. The absence of friends, loved ones, or companionship can create a sense of isolation that feels insurmountable. We might feel as though we are forgotten or overlooked by the world. But it is during these seasons of solitude that we are given the opportunity to shift our perspective, to look beyond our immediate circumstances, and to recognize that God, the creator of the universe, has a plan and purpose for each of us. In fact, the loneliness we experience can often be the very thing that positions us for the greatest breakthroughs, both spiritually and personally. It is often in the stillness, in the moments when the noise of the world fades away, that we become more aware of the presence of God. Loneliness has a unique way of stripping away the distractions that so often occupy our attention. In these times when we have nowhere else to turn and no one else to rely on, we are forced to look inward, to search for meaning beyond the superficial relationships and external validation that the world offers. God uses these moments to draw us closer to Him, to refine our hearts, and to prepare us for what lies ahead. The Bible is full of stories of individuals who, in their loneliness, discovered a deeper sense of purpose, strength, and understanding of God's plan. For instance, consider the life of Elijah. Elijah was a mighty prophet who had witnessed God's power in extraordinary ways. He had called down fire from heaven, confronted false prophets, and stood strong in the face of adversity. However, after facing intense opposition from Queen Jezebel, Elijah fled into the wilderness, overwhelmed and feeling utterly alone. He was depressed, scared, and ready to give up on life. In 1 Kings 19:10, Elijah cries out, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God."